Let's talk about the false matrix, how I got trapped in it, and how I've started to escape that false matrix in this reality that we live in. What do I mean by false matrix? Well, I'll tell you through a little bit of a story. Just one piece of my background is that I believed that one of the ways for me to be accepted and that's a weird word, but to make it in life was to follow the path that other family members like my father did, which was to go be an academic scientist. It seemed like it was a good job for me in the sense that I was interested in science. I've always been curious about all sorts of things and asked big questions about why are we here and the meaning of life and all of that kind of stuff. And science seemed a good way to pursue and be able to be a part of that. And getting a sort of tenured faculty job, which means tenure means that really once you achieve that milestone of being, quote, tenured, that means you really have sort of a job for life. And I figured I wanted that stability. I wanted that security of a real job where I just wouldn't have to worry about it. So that's what I worked towards. Now, often it was at odds with the core of who I am because I'm curious, but I also don't like to go along with just whatever some random authority says. I'm not into that. I don't believe in whatever authorities as being the authority. I don't just take what any authority says as true. And in fact, quite often, I have this suspicion, this rejection of authority, like, yeah, these authority figures don't know what they're talking about. And that's been with me since I was an undergraduate doing a physics degree. I remember arguments with my quantum mechanics instructor as he would say, well, I know this stuff doesn't really make sense, that it's a wave, then a particle all of a sudden, but just ignore that and just do the math. And I was like, wait a second. I'm just supposed to ignore that and just like not care about it and just crank these equations as if the math is the only thing that exists. And we had some arguments, and I got called into his office as a senior undergraduate in physics. I got called into his office for disrupting the class. So that's the kind of thing. So I've always had that thing of just not accepting the answers because I always had this sense from the time I was younger that the answers that we receive from authority figures, whether they're teachers or politicians or economic leaders, are kind of BS. That there's a lot of manipulation, distortion, whatever there. I always had that sense. But I reached a point in my life where I either had to sort of swallow it and say, it's just me. It's just me being whatever, cynical, problematic, contrarian, whatever. Or say, that's real, that my feeling about these people is real, about authority is real. And in that case, not go down this path that I wanted to go down for my sense of security and safety. So I ultimately decided on the security and safety. And I think many people can get that in this society that we've lived in, that job security, economic security seems to override for many of us most other considerations, especially having a family. It was really important to me to be able to support them. And I didn't see a path forward for being a contrarian in supporting my family unless I just, drove a taxi cab or something. And that, yes, that places my age before there was Uber and stuff like that. So it was a tough decision, but ultimately I decided I'm going to follow this academic route. And so I decided I have to tamp it down. I have to accept, I have to just become part of that system and agree pretty much with what that system says is true and correct. And, maybe poke at it a little bit here and there, but not challenge it in any big way. Otherwise, I would never do that. And I actually succeeded in that. Once I really got into that mode, I succeeded to a pretty good degree. I had a faculty job at a top 5 public university in top department in the field of microbiology and immunology, and also biomedical engineering, and also computer science. So I was in 3 departments with appointments, and I got lots of funding after some initial struggles. I really had some struggles, but yeah, I got over that. And then once I figured that out, I had a lot of grant funding. I had a big team working for me, and I got tenure. And my departmental faculty, who are the first people who vote for whether you get tenure or not, they gave unanimous support for me getting tenure. So that was a sign that I was really playing the game well by that point. There were some rocky moments leading up to that, but what was so interesting is that after I got that tenure, my whole feeling wasn't one of excitement. When I got the notice, it was like, yay, I got tenure. Oh, boo. Oh no, I'm going to be a part of this for the rest of my life. And that's when the real problems began, because a part of me realized that already that this system that I had become a part of, what I had agreed to as part of being in that system, was just antithetical to who I am, but I conclude antithetical to humanity. Because one of the things that happened when I announced that I was leaving later on, after getting tenure, it was about 4 years later, I announced one Friday afternoon, I sent an email to my chair saying, I resign. And it was over some squabble over some resources and whatever. Now, again, a tenured faculty job with a large lab, a good salary because I was in a well-paid field. And I sent this email that threw it all away in one email. How did I get to that point? Well, there was a lot of surface level stuff that went on to do that. A lot of, little squabbles over space because we never, from my perception, had enough space, and over funding that was promised and then not delivered, or funding, people not being happy with results and then just taking funding away, but retroactively, just various squabbles. And I could blame it all on them, but I was certainly a participant. Any squabble is a two-sided thing. What is underlying that? I've thought about that for many years since leaving that faculty job. And I'll just say, after leaving that job, I did try to pick things up at another university that was willing to take me and the funding that came with the grants that I had had. And I only lasted 2 more years at that other university, even though I was like there in a relative sense, like a quote bigwig, because I had a lot of funding and it was a smaller university. I just didn't last. So why didn't I last? Well, I thought, something wrong with me. There is something wrong with me. I'm broken. Like I just can't fit in to this system. So let me describe some of the ways in which I felt that I couldn't fit in. One is just this expectation of it being a constant grind, that work should dominate pretty much everything in life, and that we shouldn't really have too many outside interests, especially not earlier in the career, that, the career is kind of everything, and that you've got to sacrifice and work and just be beholden to this whole career. And not only that in order to be successful in that career, you kind of have to suck up your point of view. And even if you disagree with what's going on or think some of the stuff going on in the field is kind of inane, you can't really speak up very loudly about that, because then your colleagues will get offended. And those are the same colleagues who will then get together and say, no, you're not going to get tenure, or no, you're not going to get grant funding, which is an even bigger deal than tenure. You kind of have to play along with what the field is doing and be a yes person, like nod your head and just yes, yes, okay, I get it. Oh, but have you considered this one little thing? You can do that sometimes, but come up with a new cure for some disease that, sort of invalidates what your colleagues have been doing for the last 10 or 20 years, forget it. You're the pariah, at least for 10 or 20 years, which can be a big piece of a career. So I had been playing that game and I realized how this wasn't real science. And by the way, where I'm going somewhere with this is not about science specifically. This is not about science careers even. It's about this game, this system that we all have to play in, because the system that I played in is the same as the system that a majority of the humans who at least live in industrialized countries play within. So let me just finish describing that and then explain what that is. So it was just this constant grind, constant march. Work was expected to be primary. It was all premised on this idea of economic security, not just because I liked it, but that I needed economic security. So it turned for me from something of like curiosity and interest in science to this long grind of getting one paper after another, getting one grant after another, trying to get the funding in so I can keep it going, so I can keep the employees, and then trying to deal with managing all of that and them, and then trying to keep that going, and then trying to get more funding, and just this grind like a machine that had to keep being fed all the time. And if I didn't keep feeding that machine with my blood, sweat, and tears, then, things would come crashing down for me and also for other people. And I think so many of us feel that way, because when I announced, an example is when I announced my resignation, there was somebody who came to me in private from my university who said, you know what, I am not really very happy with my job here, with my tenure job here at this university. And I would leave like you were if I weren't so afraid of the economic consequences. I have kids coming into college and I need to pay the bills and all of that. So I'm going to stick with this job that I know is sucking the life out of me, but I'm going to stick with it because I feel like I have to. That, my dear friends, that is the matrix. That is the very epitome of, if you go to that, watch that movie, which I did again recently, the Matrix movie. People are plugged into a matrix that drains their energy, that drains their lifeblood. That's their whole purpose for existence, is so that they can feed this matrix. And since that time of leaving that job, I have become convinced. It sounds like I'm a conspiracy nut, and I really am reluctant to say that, but I have become convinced that there is this model of reality which says this is the way that we all must be. We all must be basically cogs in ongoing machines of various kinds. If you've ever felt economically strapped, like you're just struggling to keep up, and and then you hear these financial advisors, oh, just get out of debt, and then it'll all be wonderful. Well, maybe getting out of debt is the solution to that. I've tried, and that's a hard one. But that doesn't remove that fundamental necessity. And some people will say, oh, just play the stock market or learn how to invest or start a business. Okay, so that's what I did. I started a business. That did not solve that problem. Being an entrepreneur, being independent, in terms of that grind, in terms of that never-ending need to feed the machine, it actually got worse as an entrepreneur, not better, to much to my chagrin. And I've been involved in multiple businesses, and the one that I ran after leaving the job, that faculty job, for like 16 years. So I kept it going for 16 years, which is a pretty unusually successful track record for a startup business that had no external funding. But I mean, grind, 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 just constantly having to feed the marketing and the sales and the this and the that and feed things and keep things going just to hang on and keep barely alive. And yet there are certain people who seem to like just have all the money they could possibly want. And this is not I don't want to make this into like a specific thing about, the haves versus the have-nots. That's kind of a separate issue from my point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is that many of us seem trapped in this cycle where our economic needs determine our whole existence ultimately. Our need to get a job or multiple jobs for many people, our need, they determine everything, and they keep us focused so much on constantly just surviving, that it's kind of a grinding and very machine-like thing. It's like, be a part of this machine, be a part of this economic engine, or be this outcast. And if you're really lucky, have the right connections, the right mindset, and maybe all of that stuff that I never seem to quite get together fully, then maybe you can skyrocket. Maybe it's just being part of, a certain club of people. Maybe that's what causes that to skyrocket, and I wasn't part of the club, and so maybe that was it. Whatever the case, I think most of us have been a part of that machine. And the thing about this machine, this matrix, is it says, keep your head down. Don't speak up. Don't rock the boat. Don't jeopardize your job. Blah, 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 blah. It just expects you to be a part of it, to be that cog. And it comes from this deeper worldview. So I want to talk about models and worldviews for just a second. So when I work with people on their scientific grant proposals and things like that, they have to propose to this group of their peers, like, here's what I want to do. And we talk a lot about presenting a model for your research, a mental model. So an example of a mental model is the DNA helix. You've probably heard of that if you've done much science stuff at all. So the idea is that our DNA is actually a helical sort of coil that, what else can I say but helical coil? It's a helical coil, and there are base pairs along, it's sort of like a ladder along that coil that encodes the information of our DNA. Okay. That is a model. And people don't understand the difference between a model and reality. Reality is a bunch of complex atomic wave functions interacting in ways that we can't possibly yet comprehend or see. And what we've done is to make that simpler for ourselves is we've taken that complex soup of things going on and simplified it into that mental model of a helix. And you can go out and get support data that supports that model or not. And so that model is by now a very well-supported model that something like that is going on. But is it the whole picture, that model of the helix? No, there's so much that has been discovered, other layers of information that affect what happens on the DNA that have been discovered since then. So it's a model, but it's, as all mental models are, they are incomplete because the universe is so much bigger and so much more complex than what our brains, our minds can hold. And okay, so models are important. They're important in science, but they're also important here because here in life in general, models are important. We all carry around models. Now, most of us think that our models are just, quote, reality. Like if you think that if you're somebody who believes in evolutionary biology, that is a model. If you believe in creationism, that is a different model. And we all walk around thinking our model is reality. Now, this is a big problem because most of us are unaware of our models or don't question our models, don't say, is this model correct? And I think all models are incorrect because, again, they are limited compared to the much more complex reality. And though there are some scientists who think we're so advanced, we know all of this stuff, there's like this smug, we are at the top of the evolutionary food chain, and pretty soon we're going to invent AI that will just figure out everything. I think that's a level of smugness that I just, you know, it's kind of a ridiculous thing to think that we actually do know that. There was somebody in the late 1800s, and I wish I had the quote in front of me, but there was somebody who said, somebody serious, like somebody who worked, I think, with the patent office at that time, who said pretty much everything that needs to be or could be invented has pretty much been invented by that time. That was the late 1800s. Okay, I mean, I hear people with that same attitude today. I think they're going to be surprised, to say the least, in how much we actually don't know in our models of reality. Okay, so back to models of reality. This one is about a thing that's more fundamental even than science versus religion. You might think that those two are opposed in many ways, and in some ways they are, but in many ways they accept the same fundamental model of reality that is machine-like. It is this machine-like that says, essentially, we are machines. And I mentioned this in the intro video. I'm just going deeper into this and how I accepted it, how it affected me, and how I started escaping it. So it says that we are machine-like, the universe is machine-like, and therefore the highest ideal to strive for is to be a better machine. Essentially to out AI the AIs, except that now that we have AIs, that's in some areas becoming increasingly difficult, although we can out AI the AI in other ways, like intuition, which AIs don't have. So this is like, we have bought into this as a society, this machine-like model where the ultimate culmination, the ultimate good within that mental model is to be more efficient, more productive, and output a higher quantity of things. More efficient, more productive, higher quantity of things. I think it's a product of industrial revolution. I think it's also a product of, if there were ever a conspiracy theory, a conspiracy to keep us all working within this machine with the people at the top of the machine, basically yielding all the fruits of that. Now we see that machine starting to sputter. We see it sputtering. We have witnessed over the last decades how flawed it is in so many ways. This model that more is always better, efficiency is the best, that, controlling people is the only way to go, all of that kind of stuff. The alternative model that I've been exploring, and that other people are too, is a model of consciousness, a model of spirit, a model of humanity that says we aren't here for that. We humans didn't come here as part of some machine-like universe just to toil and suffer until the end of our lives and then be judged whether we suffered enough or not. I reject that model now. And I wish I had rejected it earlier, because I've been calling this the humanist model, the new model. The idea that we are humans here to having a learning and growing experience. And so are all consciousnesses on this planet. That trees have some basic consciousness to them. And I shouldn't say basic, but just very different than our own, so it's hard for us to relate to that consciousness. And there have been studies that have shown that plants respond to the vibe. They respond to singing, they respond to all sorts of things. Plants, animals, perhaps the planet itself has some measure of consciousness associated with it. That's a whole separate discussion. But that we live in this very alive universe, and we are alive beings who came into these bodies to experience this reality and to have a learning, growth, interesting, joyous experience of this reality, not just a grinding, grating, machine-like thing. I heard somebody from another person say recently that time does not exist. And I want to do a whole separate video or videos on that because time is a big issue that it's worth some discussion. I think what the fundamental of that statement is, I actually think that there is something we could call time, but that it's different than how we relate to it. That the way most of us relate to it, like with constantly wearing a watch, keeping track of the clock, keeping track of, did we output enough widgets during the quote time we have, that's what people mean when they say time is an illusion. That we measure ourselves according to this linear yardstick of, just ultimately the beating of mechanical gears, or these days with clocks based on cesium atoms and their vibrational rates, frequencies, that we're basing our lives upon some random standard that was developed based on cesium atoms or before that mechanical gears, and judging everything based upon that. And that is certainly a sort of lie, a falsehood, that life is in any way constructed to be that. All you have to do is look at nature and see from nature that nature doesn't work on a linear clock scale. Nature works according to cycles. Every creature in nature, every tree, every plant, every animal, everything works on these cycles, but they're spontaneous based upon weather patterns and sunlight available, water available, all of that. It's very organic, and there's a periodicity to it, but it is not machine-like. Things come and go, trends happen. Like where I'm at the time I'm recording, we're having a drought of snow, and we usually have a lot, whereas other parts of our country are having mass amounts of snow that are unusual and that they shouldn't have. And yet this machine-like clock goes on. It goes on. Come on, get to work. Who cares if you have 2 inches of ice out there? Okay, well, maybe you can take a day or two off, but come on, back to work. There's a fundamental conflict between this machine-like and very clock-like way of being and this organic, humanitarian way of being. And that's what I discovered through that whole process of going through, learning the ways of academia and the expectations that I should be just a yes person, nodding my head, going along with the machine. I left that, and then I created my own machine because I didn't know any way to not do that. All of my mentors taught ways of being more machine-like, all my business mentors. And I sought out a lot of business mentoring because I thought, why am I failing at that? What is my problem? I wasn't failing at it, but I wasn't ever doing great at it. And ultimately, I realized that model is flawed. It is not about humanity. And this is the important thing. What I have realized recently is that we are seeing now on a mass scale the failures of the machine-like model. We are seeing people rising up and saying no. And it's not just in politics. We're seeing huge economic cracks showing in the system, political problems, geopolitical problems, social problems, and unrest and chaos. I mean, all of it at this time. And I take heart from that. It's not like I want chaos for us. It's that I see that through these cracks in what has been happening, a an opening is happening, a bigger and bigger opening for us to say no more, no more to the machine-like way of being, to reject that, to reject the inevitability of it all, this constant march towards faster machines and better AI and this and that. And by the way, I'm not anti-AI, but I'm also not a cheerleader for just the march of progress to who knows where for AI either. I think if we were able to relate to, let's say, a technology like AI with a much more humanistic and ecological point of view that says, okay, AI may have some potential to help humanity in certain ways. Great. Let's make sure we build that in a reasonable way, at a reasonable speed, and make sure that it's not taking over our humanity. And you might say, well, but wait, and this is what the critics of that point of view have said, and so I'm just anticipating, is but wait, but the competition, but this other country, they might beat us in this game. That's all the machine-like model. And we're seeing, in some senses, the near implosion of things in the United States due to the extremes of trying to operate by that model. I think other countries that follow that same model are not going to be far behind us, because an economy is based ultimately on people. And people have become increasingly strained in economies that have pursued this ideal to the extreme, this machine-like thing. This it's also very individualistic. Like, I want more quantity of stuff for me above anything else. I want it's me, me, me. And that's a whole separate video too, is like the me generation and the me, me, me attitude. So where am I going? Where are we going? What I'm saying is, this is an opportunity too. This is an opportunity to step back and look at it and say, oh, was I accepting this machine-like model for myself, for the way I operate in life? Did I get sort of receive that brainwashing and sort of take it on without even knowing I took it on? Because that was certainly my case. I didn't even know that that's what was going on until much more recently. And once I realized that's what's going on and started saying no to that, things are easier. I'm not saying suddenly the business is way easier than it was, but it is actually easier and going better than it was when I was trying to do that. Ironically. So becoming more human, go figure. Treating employees and other people in a more humane way, that actually works better, not worse. And I think that seems obvious, and yet it's so subtle how we can buy into this systemic machine-like model of reality. And I'm just saying it's time to step back, if you choose to, and evaluate, do I want to think about adopting a different model, moving towards a different model for myself and humanity? Because I'll tell you, as I've thought about this more, the idea of building a more human-focused, and for the other plants and animals and the world itself, but a more humanistic kind of system and approach, that's like truly exciting. And I think we're moving towards a point where we're going to really have an opportunity to do that. Maybe I'm overly hopeful. I know that if we look at the surface of things, that it's a mess. But I've talked in the past about the kitchen remodel, how when you're in the middle of a kitchen remodel and everything's being torn down, it looks like a mess. It looks really scary. And if I were to walk into that kitchen remodel in the middle and I didn't know that that's what was going on, that we were actually having a remodel, like let's say I went I went off planet for a while or something, and then I came back and didn't know that we're doing a remodel, and I just saw my kitchen torn apart, I would be freaked out. And I think that's what a lot of us are naturally having that response, because we don't see the bigger picture, that maybe our model was wrong. Maybe it's not that, all of these negative things are just going to take over and that's inevitable. Maybe what we're seeing instead in the bigger picture is the breakdown of that mechanical model, which was never really something that should have persisted as long as it did, that kept us captive, kept our heads down, kept us churning as part of the machine, that its time is ending. And that there's going to be kind of a mess, kind of a teardown of that, when we figure out how do we replace that with something that's more human, something that supports the earth, the earth's peoples, and all of us, supports everyone in a true humanistic way, rather than in this grinding, just, I've got to earn as much money as I can so I can just, look at the numbers on a spreadsheet and say, yay, I'm good. I'm a good person because I earned so much money. And again, I bought into that. I get it. It doesn't lead anywhere. It really doesn't. All right. I'll stop there. I could say more, but there's always other videos, right? So, speaking of other videos, if you want to hear about them, that subscribe button is going to do wonders for you hearing about future discussions. I've got so much more. Every day I think of more. And I've got like journals full of like ideas to share. And it's just taken me a while to get going and to finally sit down and say, okay, I'm going to just, even if I'm tired, get in front of the video and talk about this stuff. So I'll be doing more. And subscribe is how you can hear about it. Like doesn't hurt too. That's awesome if you like the video. And on the tube of you, if you do a hype, and I don't even know that much about like how that whole thing works, but supposedly if you do a hype that helps promote a video, like just promoting this would be awesome. This is a small channel as of yet, and I think this is an important message. This idea of like, let's build a more human focused future. We don't have to be doom and gloom. I mean, I have my plenty of moments of doom and gloom. I get it. I really do. And it can be a frequent occurrence. And yet I have learned how to get myself out of it too. And I think it's really important for all of us to get out of that and get onto this building of a better future for humanity. So I'll see you next time.